Good morning, everyone. I'm Kevin Allen, and this is Tom Laidlaw, the former NHL defenseman for the New York Rangers and Los Angeles King, and we bring you the Laidlaw and Allen report. And Tom, we're going to start off with some pretty breaking news on two fronts. One story with the New Jersey Devils and another with the New York Rangers.
Yeah, we'll start with the Rangers. Not newsflash right away, but just in the last, hour or something, the Rangers recalled goalie Shesterkin that was down in the minors in Hartford. And apparently he has just been playing outstanding. They had a feature on him, I think last week, one of their games, where how great he's been playing and interviewed everybody. And it's actually very interesting, too. He was talking, saying, listen, he thinks he's ready to go. He was very patient. It wasn't like he was pushing the panic button, but he wanted to be up playing in the National Hockey League. And by all accounts, he is just a fantastic goaltender, a great competitor. I view him a lot like our boy down in Tampa there, Vasilevsky. That work ethic, great athlete, competitive, very professional young guy, especially at that age. So big news. So everybody expects now. At first, I thought, well, Jesus, Hank's sick. Is Henrik Lundqvist sick or something? But apparently, there's no illness or sickness or anything with any of the other goaltenders. So everybody's assuming that Georgiev could be on the move here. And a lot of people are even speculating that San Jose could be one of the destinations because they've had trouble in that. But that's, I think, a stretch. People are kind of trying to put two and two together. So big news.
Well, but sometimes there's a lot of logic to putting two and two together because it's always four. So I like it.
So, I've had not before a couple of times. I've made it into not four.
Well, that's true. That is true. I could see that you could add two and two and not come up with four. Yeah. Well, isn't that the old joke? Or when you ask 100 people how much is 2 plus 2, and everybody comes in and says, "Duh, it's 4." And the accountant comes in and says, "What do you want it to be?"
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
So, but what do you think this means for the Rangers?
Well, I do think Georgiev is. I know a lot of fans think they love Henrik Lundqvist and you'd like to trade him. And listen, maybe it is Henrik Lundqvist that gets moved here. At the end of his career. Again, he's got a no trade clause, so that he'd have to approve of that, and maybe that's in the works there. But a lot of people are assuming that Georgiev is going to be on the move. He's played fantastic. He's had a couple of rough games, but I thought he's played fantastic too. I'm assuming they would get something for him to help him in the rebuild. Again, it could be Hank, but everybody that I'm talking to seems to think, and this is just speculation, that Georgiev is on the move.
No, I obviously have not talked to Henrik Lundqvist about this, but I would think Henrik Lundqvist would have a difficult time allowing himself to be traded. I think back to Matt Sundin when he wouldn't leave the Toronto Maple Leafs in the latter stages of his career, just because he saw himself as a Maple Leaf and he didn't want to be anything else. And I've talked with Lundqvist about New York so often that I just think he kind of wants to retire here. He's talked about living in New York when he's done, and I don't know. I think he'd have a difficult time. Even if he had a chance to win a cup. And
that whole thing that everybody says, well, and we're talking about another player up here that's asked for a trade too, but moving to a team that's got a chance to win the cup. But it seems like every year, who is that team? It's right. Like the old days, like with Ray Bourque, they traded him out of Boston and put him to Colorado because everybody just assumed eventually Colorado is going to win the cup there. I just don't. That's just not the way it is nowadays. So the thought that you're going to go someplace that's going to win the cup, that's the tough one.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then the other news involves PK Subban.
Yeah. So do we take credit for predicting this before he ever got to New Jersey, or how do we?
Yeah, I think you've got a big "I told you so" that you can hang over me because you just never liked this from the beginning. I thought that why not take a chance on it? I thought Subban was a more committed team guy than you did, and you've turned out to be right. He wants out.
PK Subban has asked for a trade out of New Jersey. And again, the quotes, I don't know if they're accurate or not, but saying that he wants to go someplace that's close to winning the cup. But I don't know, if I'm a team that's close to winning the cup, am I going to want PK, especially the PK Subban you're seeing play right now? I mean, his game is really slid off. And if he wants to get traded, he certainly hasn't helped his case. I mean, I don't see a team out there like the Bostons, the St. Louis, the Tampas, the Washington Capitals. I don't know why those teams are going to want to add him to the line. The problem with PK Subban is, and again, I've said this before, I think he is fantastic for the league. He's colorful. He's an incredible athlete. I think he's doing a great job of marketing himself and the game. So I love him from all those regards. But if I'm going to try to put a team together that wants to win a Stanley Cup, he has been more, I hate to say this, but he's been more of a I was going to say sideshow if that's very disrespectful, but he's caused more problems I think than he has like to help bring the team together, both in Montreal and in Nashville where he's been in the past. So I can see why he wants to get moved out of there. Things have not gone well there in New Jersey, but I just don't see a place that is a contender. Frankly, even I just don't know what other team is going to want PK Subban right now, especially the way he's playing.
You don't think if he was with a different team and he was really excited about their chances that he would kind of step up his game? I mean, because we've seen that before.
I mean, I think you're in Montreal. Like if you're like. Again, my concern is PK Subban more worried about marketing himself and advertising himself to get ready for after the game. Seems that's his focus is right now. I don't see him focused on being that team guy that is focused on winning the Stanley Cup. Again, fantastic athlete, and he may help in the short term put people in the seats, but I just don't see how. I just haven't seen it from him. Listen, maybe somebody takes a gamble on it, but if Ray Shero in New Jersey is going to trade him, he's going to want something for him. What do I want to give up to get PK Subban? And do I want to upset the locker room? To me, that's the baggage that comes with him. It's just like that. Like he doesn't, instead of like pulling everybody together, it's like, oh God, here comes PK. He's more worried about PK Subban than he is worried about winning the Stanley Cup. So that's my concern.
Well, what about if you were Barry Trotz and they're looking for a puck-moving defenseman? And I mean, do you have faith in your own ability to kind of get players to buy into what you're selling? Barry Trotz did that in Washington with Ovechkin. Could he do it with PK Subban? And is it worth the assets they'd have to give up? Now, the other issue with him is, I think if he were a rental, I think you'd have a lot of people interested. But the fact that he's got 3 years, this year and two more, left with $9 million cap hit, that's tough to swallow.
Very interesting that you mentioned the Islanders, though, too. And you're right to mention Barry Trotz, but the addition to that, too, is Lou Lamoriello as the general manager.
Yeah.
It's like Lou Lamoriello sits him down and says, listen, this is the way we do things here in the island now. The same way we did things in New Jersey. You'd think he'd buy into it, but I don't know. For me, I just would not do it. I don't. I just think the negatives are far away the positives, and I just don't see him. I don't see him as a young player in Montreal. They had problems with him. He just wanted to do his own thing. In Nashville, it didn't work out. And I just, here you are in New Jersey, and I know that it's not New York, but it's close to New York, and he's getting married to Lindsey Vonn, and they've got their marketing stuff going on. You think he'd want to stay in this tri-state area so that he could capitalize on New York City, but he hasn't done that. So,
yeah, no, that's going to be interesting. Speaking of that, since our last podcast, Kovalchuk is with Montreal now, and I wanted to get your thoughts on that. It's interesting. I think we all had heard sort of the story about Kovalchuk is that he was not necessarily a great teammate, but I've, subsequent to this coming out, I've had seen and read other players coming out and saying, I don't know what they're talking about. He was great when I, played beside him and wherever. What's your thought on that? Is he going to fit? Is this a good gamble for Montreal? To me, because it costs so little, it seems like a good gamble.
It's a two-way contract too, right? Isn't it 700 in the National Hockey League and 70 in the minors? It was a brilliant move by Montreal. I'm not high on this player at all, the way he's currently playing, but he has shown that he can be a great player. I can't see a player being more motivated than he would be. Going to a city like Montreal, they've had their struggles this year, but they've also had times where they look like a pretty decent team. They could do something in the playoffs if he really helps in the power play and everything. I think that's where he could really help. And like I said, if it doesn't work, you send him to the minors, you're paying him $70,000. So I thought that was a brilliant move by Montreal. And you know what? I hope that here's a player that is really motivated to take advantage of the opportunity because he has shown what a great player he is. But again, I think I've told a story before where when I was covering the KHL, the Russian league, and this must have been like 4 or 5 years ago, or maybe longer in the playoffs, and they didn't even dress him. They had enough of a problem with him. They put him up in the press box, and that was the KHL. They didn't even want Kovalchuk on the ice. So he has proven that he can be a great player, but he's got to get his act together.
Well, it does seem like he is motivated because he could have just packed it up and gone home to Russia.
Yep.
And he chose not to do that. I think he wanted to play, with the greatest players in the world. So, let's give him some credit for that.
Yep.
I just see this as a no-brainer for Montreal. Like there's no, like I don't, I've seen people say, oh, well, he's just going to do damage in the room. I just don't see that.
I think a PK Subban could do more damage in the room, but I don't think Kovalchuk is that kind of a guy. I just, like he's, especially with that contract, it's just if there's any problems at all, get rid of him. But no, I like it. It's a great move.
Well, speaking of that, like the disruption in the room, like is it? It's not what he does in the room. It's just the guy's reaction to who he is, right? Like I just can't imagine that. Just because he's in the room doesn't change anything. But
okay. Use PK Subban for example. I just seen so many times on the ice where his focus is not. Now everybody slips up once in a while, but his focus is not on the team and winning. It's on, oh, poor PK Subban. Somebody's done something to me. I need to retaliate immediately. It doesn't matter how I hurt the hockey team. See, that's the problem with PK Subban. And then that creeps now. Then you talk about the locker room. Now you get in the locker room. And everybody's like, geez, I'm busting my rear end here. And I'm taking a slash across the hands. I'm not retaliating. This guy gets whacked a little bit. And now he's taking a penalty. To me, that's causes the problems. And that seems to be PK Subban's problems. I don't think that's the issue with Kovalchuk. If any, it's just the expectation that he's going to do a certain amount out there, and it hasn't happened. I mean, I think that's the issue. It's not that he's more of a selfish player. It's just that he's not performing to the level they expect him to. Yeah,
no. The what's your prediction for what Kovalchuk will do in Montreal? Is this going to work, or
yes, I think it's going to work. I do, because I think they need him more. I think that they've got some good guys around him. I think they need him. He's motivated. It's a hockey, it's a hockey market. Maybe, I don't know, maybe part of LA was, it's not necessarily that big hockey market, but it's Montreal. Is this his last kick at the can when it comes to the national hockey? They've got a decent hockey team. I think it's going to work. I think it's a great move. I hope it works for him.
I wanted to get in a little bit into the All-Star game. We've already had players come out and say they're not going to make it. Ovechkin, Fleury. And then we had the case of Dylan Larkin, a young star with the Red Wings, who was part of the the late fan vote, that kind of your last chance or second chance to get in, and he basically told the fan base, I love you guys and I appreciate it, but I'd rather have the time off. And he's been criticized for that in some quarters. Brian Burke was among those that criticized him on that. And first of all, let's start out. We'll take these off at a time. What's your thoughts as a former player, a former agent, on a player having to sit out a game as a suspension for skipping the All-Star game? Do you like that or not?
Well, I don't like it, but I see why the league feels like they have to do it. They can't have everybody just deciding they're not going to go to the All-Star game, right? I mean, if there's no penalty to it, then a lot of guys won't go. Yes, it's an honor to go to the All-Star game. It's an honor to be selected. But it is like the rest of the guys that don't play in the All-Star game, they've got time off. They've got time to rest any injuries, to just rest their bodies and now come back refreshed. Those guys that are going to the All-Star game, they've got to travel to the All-Star game. They've got to participate in all the events there. It's great. It's an honor. It's fun. It's something, especially a guy that doesn't get to go that often. It's something he'll never forget. His family gets to go and everything. But if you really start talking about the season and trying to help your team win, I can see why, especially why Ovechkin has said that he's not going to go. He wants to rest himself up to help win. And I think that, I kind of admire that mentality. He's giving up here's a star guy. He's giving up all the limelight that he's, could get and all the fun he could have, to stay and rest up for his team. So I admire that. And again, I understand why the league suspended him for a game, but I think he's willing to say, okay, that's fine. I get to rest even more here and I'll be ready for the stretch run for the team. Dylan Larkin, that's a tougher one. I mean, his team's obviously not going to make the playoffs. I think for him to be around those other All-Stars would be a good thing for him, to learn a little bit. But I understand why he wouldn't want to go. But I could see where Brian Burke, I thought Berkey was a little bit tough on him, but I could see where Berkey is saying, listen, this is something that you need to go to. You should be, I can't remember how he put it, they should be, maybe walking to the All-Star game to get there. But so I like the fact that Ovechkin doesn't go because he's doing it, I think, for the right reason, to rest. With Larkin, I wish he would go. If he's a guy that's going every year, then maybe it's different. But for a young guy like that, I think it's important that he gets there.
Yeah, I think we have similar thoughts. I feel that Fleury, but particularly Ovechkin, and the same would be true with Sidney Crosby, has earned the right to do what they need to do.
Yeah.
Ovechkin has gone to many, many, many All-Star games, and more importantly, of the case of guys like Ovechkin and Crosby and Connor McDavid, they're asked to do so much in terms of selling the league. Like, when you have the NHL media tour every year in the fall, those are the guys that are in big demand for the television commercials and for everything else. They've got to come in and they spend a whole day, doing that. They're constantly asked to do national interviews, and Crosby and Ovechkin and McDavid, do so much that I think they've sort of earned that right. And and I don't think anyone should fault that. The fact that maybe they just want to sit around and sit on their couch and watch television for 3 days. They're just kind of worn out. And the argument in Detroit is that Larkin has gone to the World Championships the last couple of years, and he always answers the call. And even his coach said, I think he needs a rest, but I'm not really buying that. And I really like Dylan Larkin. I think it's a guy that cares greatly about his team. He should be the captain there. I don't want to question Steve Yzerman, because I think he's earned the right to do what he wants to do in terms of the captain, because he certainly knows more about leadership than most of us. He was one of the greatest captains in NHL history. Absolutely. But I thought Yzerman should have named Larkin captain. But saying all that, like, I think he's being short-sighted. I think Berkey's right on when he said that Larkin could learn a lot by going to this, and you see how veteran players conduct themselves. You get a chance to sit around and compare notes with some of the greatest players in the world. And plus, I mean, you give back to the game. That All-Star game is always criticized because of the lack of competitiveness, and not having a guy like Larkin who doesn't, he's not sort of paying homage to the fact that it should be considered as a spectacle. So I'm going to be a little critical as well. I don't think this is we should, be mad at him forever, but I wish he would have gone.
No, I agree too. I agree. And I think it would help him too. Like, I tell you, like, I remember when you talk about Yzerman, you talk about Mary Lemieux when they first came in the league. They were very talented players, but they hadn't learned how to win yet. They hadn't learned how to be the professional that the older guys had, that Wayne Gretzky had figured out, that Mark Messier had figured out. And then when they got to play on those World Championships or the Olympic teams, and they alongside those other great players, then they still had that skill. Then their game went to a whole different level because they got to be around those guys. So I think it'd be good for Dylan Larkin to be around that. He has been there before, like you said, he's played in the World Championships. But I agree with you. It's just like, you're just not quite there yet, young guy. And especially like the resting for what? Your team's not making the playoffs. So it's, what are you resting for? So I think it'd be good for him to go and do it for the league too. But again, I think we agree on Ovechkin in particular not going. He's done enough and deserves a rest. So, yep.
Would you have felt differently if you were a player back when you were playing?
I'm trying to. I back then I really believed in the fact that as a young player, you had to earn your stripes. There's certain things you had to do, little things like helping the trainers load the bus with the bags. Being the last in line for if you had the buffet table you're going to. You had to know your place in the game. Those older guys had gone through things and they've done things, and they knew their place in the game back when they played. So I think it was almost. It was a very important part of the game. I think players respected you more as a young player if you knew your place in the game. So if you're invited to go to the All-Star game as a young player, then you should go. Those young guys that didn't go, I remember Bobby Carpenter, who ended up being a teammate of mine, a friend of mine, and but he took a lot of heat early in his career. Well, I guess it was somewhat early in his career when he held out for a new contract, right? And then he got traded to the Rangers. Now I admire him for it, but it's just something that wasn't done very often back then, especially as a young player. To sit out, you should be sucking it up. And again, now that would be totally different. But back then, the mentality was you should be sucking it up and playing. You'll get your contract later on, kind of mentality. But he didn't do that. And he took a lot of heat for it. People looked at him differently. Now, as his career went on, he proved himself to be that great team guy, and he became more of a good team guy as he got older. So it was different. But he took a lot of heat for sitting out and not playing, wanting a new contract.
It's so interesting to me that the one thing that through the years when I've covered the NHL, the idea that like the fans as a general rule, not all of them, but as a general rule, I think feel that players are paid too much money, and that they're sort of especially you see this when it comes to lockouts, and they don't get why they set out. But my take on it's always been very unpopular when I've kind of talked about this, but I've always felt that it's just no different than any other employment. I mean, if you believe in a capitalistic system, and then you believe that the way the system works is, that it's the employee tries to get as much money as they can for doing whatever it is they do, and it's up to the employer to say kind of yes or no. And the reason why I never made $1 million a year writing about hockey for USA Today is USA Today said, no, I can get others to do that.
Right.
But in this case, you can't always get others to do what a player can do. And should we fault them that they're in a position to do that? So I've never quite understood that. And but invariably, most fans, I think, blame players for whatever kind of contract troubles it is.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah. And it's kind of unfair that way. Interesting quote here by our friend Barry Shelley. And he brings up a very good point. Shouldn't the fans that are going to the All-Star game, shouldn't they have all the players available to them to play in the game?
Well, I mean, I think that's a fair point, but I think most fans, if they looked at it realistically, I think everybody should go as a general rule. But I'm just saying, Crosby and Ovechkin have, if they never went, I wouldn't feel the same way.
Right.
But they clearly go a lot. Ovechkin has gone a lot to the All-Star game, and Crosby has too. I mean, Crosby was MVP a couple of years ago of it. So,
but you see his point though, right? So,
yeah, for sure, I do. And I get that, and that's the point, especially the young stars, where if you don't go, it just makes it you just feed into the idea of it's just an exhibition, because it was important. And we've kicked around for years. They've tried to make it competitive. Like I covered the league so long. I remember when they used to be competitive, the All-Star games. They'd be 5-4, 3-2, because guys would play. They would try to win the game.
Totally. Well, I do remember one year I was with the Rangers here. My name was on the All-Star ballot, and probably had the worst year of my career. I don't know if that had anything to do with it or not. I did. It's terrible. But I remember seeing my name in the All-Star ballot. And I was pretty fired up about that. Like if I got selected, there's no question I was going. Absolutely, I wouldn't have missed that for the world. But it's different for those guys that are going all the time. But you go back to the Gordie Howe and Wayne Gretzky. They got called. They went to it. That was the thing about Wayne. And I was so fortunate to play with him in Los Angeles. And people always ask what it was like to play with him. And he understood his place in the game, and he rarely turned down things to help the game, whether it was getting interviewed or signing autographs or the way he played the game, the way he treated teammates, everybody around. He just was, I just don't see Wayne ever turn down. And it didn't seem to ever affect him as far as being tired or whatever. He just, he had it all together. So,
yeah. Well, it is funny how the attitudes have changed through the years. I don't remember ever, and I interviewed Wayne Gretzky a lot. I don't ever remember having a conversation with him about getting the proper rest. And, that just wasn't a conversation in the 80s.
I know. And even that's, we've talked about this before, and now we're getting off a different subject, but these back-to-back games, and people think, oh, geez, they're not going to do so well in the second of back-to-back nights. We just never thought that way. It was like, we got another game. You just got to work harder. And I don't mean to say this as a negative towards today's players. I just think it's become this big issue now. It's not the players' fault, but it's become this big issue of how we're just not going to play as well on the second of back-to-back nights. It's just, to me, it doesn't make sense. So,
well, I think it almost becomes self-fulfilling.
Yes. Yep.
Because I say this all the time. If you're a fireman,
yep,
and you fight a multi-alarm fire on a Tuesday, and you go back to your fire station, and the next day you got even a bigger fire, you don't think to yourself, boy, I'm not going to be as good today because I put out big fire yesterday.
I know. I was very lucky this past weekend. I was very fortunate we played in a charity hockey game a while ago and up in Boston, and their charity was the Navy SEAL Foundation. So I got to meet all these Navy SEALs, and they invited me down to Virginia Beach this past weekend. And since the strike, the strike over in Iran, they were all on high alert. When I was down there, we played a charity game on Friday night. Then they gave me a tour of a whole bunch of places. I actually got to fly in one of those wind tunnels that simulates parachuting. So that was good. But they gave me the tour. And it was very emotional, actually, too. This captain who was in charge of a whole platoon ended up losing 4 of his platoon members. And so he's giving me this tour of the building. We're one of the SEAL teams. I've got to be careful I don't say too much stuff, but there's these pictures memorializing all of the Navy SEALs that they've lost. But he pointed out the 4 that were under his command and how emotional that was, And I'm thinking of these guys, what they go through every day. To your point, they don't say, there's never any comment like, oh, I'm tired, I can't do my job properly today because I had to work so hard yesterday. That's just not their mentality at all. So to be around those guys makes you realize, it's almost like you wish you could put everybody in their, have them follow those guys around for one day to see how they lead their lives and the way they carry themselves. And I don't think we'd be talking about being tired in second games and back-to-back games.
Well, sure. I visited Normandy last summer, and as I read up on the history, we're struck by, so the landing of the Normandy was hard enough. Well, then those guys had to fight themselves inland for months, and nobody said, hey, why don't you take a couple of days off this week, and we won't fight the war. Everybody will just sit around, drink coffee, and then we'll pick it up again on Wednesday. They're just doing all that. So, but that's not the way it is in today's sports world. But we did get off topic. I wanted to mention about Canada.
Yes,
before we go, the most amazing thing about Canada, and this is what I admire about Canadians and their hockey, is I don't care who's on the Canadian team. Whether or not they're going to be great players and whether they're going to be superstars, they're always a factor. Always a factor. It really does not matter. There's no such thing as a non-contending Canadian team.
Yeah.
So,
because you know what it is, it's the expectation there is to win no matter what. They don't care. The people of Canada don't care if you have the most talented team or the least talented team. The expectation is that you are going to be contending for the gold medal there, and you should be winning the gold medal. So that's what they carry with them. They have that mentality. They'll just do what they have to do to win. And no disrespect to the other teams, they're playing hard as well. But Canada is just, for some reason, most years just take it to a whole different level.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I think this in particular probably has some value to specific players, this gold medal. I think Joe Veleno of the Red Wings, a guy that was playing in the minors who had kind of been inconsistent down in the AHL. I wonder if he just comes back now and he's all fired up because, he was part of all this and, was really in the middle of it all. And, and then a guy like, Hayton of the Arizona Coyotes, who was the captain of the team for Canada. Now he goes back to his NHL team. I bet he's fired up as well.
Yeah, just that experience to learn. It's another notch about learning how to win, right? The things you have to do to win, the level you have to participate as a team, the sacrifice, all that, the confidence level now. You give yourself a little bit of a license to be more of a confident player because you've gone through that. So, no, I agree totally. Great.
And then the final thing I want to bring up, I want to have you guess. You could probably guess in the calendar year 2019, who had the best record in the NHL. You could probably guess who that is.
Calendar year well, it got to be Tampa Bay.
No, it's actually not. It was I think it's St. Louis Blues.
They had the best record.
Yeah, because of their record this year, this opening of this season.
Yeah. Okay.
And they turned it on from January 5th on.
Yes, that's good. Yes,
but who's number 2?
Boston.
No.
Who? But not Boston. Not Tampa.
They're led by one of your favorite people.
The New York Islanders.
No.
one of my favorite people. You're being sarcastic when you say,
No. You really like this guy, although you once threw a stick at him.
"Oh, Donnie Waddell, on the Hurricanes."
Yeah. I just was talking to him, and we were, commenting about that. I hope I have that statistic right, but I think that's what.
Wow.
For the calendar year, they had, they had a good record last year, and they had a good start. Although I think they've hit a speed bump here. I think,
a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit, but they all go through that. Anyway, you've been listening to the Laidlaw and Allen Report. I'm Alan. He's Laidlaw. We'll be back later this week.
See you guys.